The way we fundamentally assess things it's got to move more to the approach with AI. These things in, let's say, 5 years' time, there'll be less focus on the system and more focus on the output. Almost to the point where your platform and your workplace environment are kind of seamless.
You'll have come across a number of solutions around AI, and perhaps you're using some of them at scale with apprenticeships. Maybe you're not. Have you seen anything that you think is genuinely solving problems, and are you seeing anything that is just hype?
With AI specifically, it's the question of return on investment. In the educational space, by way of AI, there's just been very little movement. One powerful implementation, it's enhancing the tools rather than creating a new tool all by itself. AI is not a replacement for hard work. AI shouldn't be a replacement, and I don't feel it will eventually be a replacement for hard work. AI is there to bolster what we do, to supplement what we do, whether you're in the teaching side or the learning side. AI is there, the tech is there to bolster what we do, to take it further, to make it more seamless. So we shouldn't be afraid of the tech. We shouldn't be fearful of it. We should see how we can work with it to arrive at what will be perfect harmony.
Quick question. If an apprentice completes their program on time, passes their endpoint assessment, and ticks every compliance box, but still can't actually do the job, have we succeeded or failed? Welcome to the Future of Learning. I'm Andrew Howie, Director of Partnerships at eLMS, and that uncomfortable question sits at the heart of today's conversation. I'm speaking with Idris Fabiyi, Head of Innovation and Technology at BPP Education Group. Through STO training, BPP delivers apprenticeships to thousands of learners, which means in the gap between what our systems measure and what actually matters. Achievement rates, timely completions, Ofsted grades, these are the metrics the sector obsesses over. But do they tell us whether someone's genuinely job ready? Whether employers got real value? Whether we've actually built capability that drives economic growth? Now, it is uniquely positioned to talk about how technology, particularly AI, is changing what's possible in apprenticeship delivery. Not the hype, not the marketing promises, but the practical reality of implementing these tools with real learners, real employers, and real constraints. So we're going to explore what innovation actually means in a compliance-heavy environment, how you personalize it at massive scale, and what the UK skills sector needs to stop and start doing if we're serious about transformation. Now, Idris, is that a fair introduction?
I would say that's a near perfect introduction. We are School of Technology also do apprenticeships as well, not just STO.
Okay, STO and the School of Technology at BPP. You're leading innovation and technology at one of the UK's largest education groups, specifically focused on apprenticeships. So, how did you end up in this space, and what drew you to this intersection of technology and skills development?
Yeah, I'll start from finishing university. Because after finishing university, I embarked on a career of teaching. So I actually taught in high school. I was a ICT teacher and really enjoyed working in school and wanted more from my professional life. As passionate as you are working in school, I was always looking for more of a challenge, something to actually drive me forward. As wonderful as it is to teach in school, I just found the challenge wasn't necessarily there. On the flip side of things, always maintained doing professional work. So whether it be freelancing, just custom builds for people, I was constantly inside of the technology world, if you like. After leaving school, I joined a software company. We produced software and the company had apprentices. And whilst working with these apprentices, I just naturally became a teacher again. So it was a perfect hybrid, working in a professional setting with up-to-date tools and technologies, and also teaching. It was a perfect intersection. And working at various companies has led me to this wonderful role that I'm in. Very happy with the kind of challenges I get given. I suppose that's how I got to being here right now.
So what surprised you most about how apprenticeships actually work versus what you kind of expected? Once you sort of got, digged under the surface and started working specifically with apprenticeships, what was the biggest surprise?
Yeah, so I would say I joined at a very interesting time in apprenticeships, in digital apprenticeships specifically, because at the time, STO training, doing and offering digital apprenticeships, I think the most surprising thing for me, because the time that I joined, we'd moved away from frameworks. For those who are not familiar with the apprenticeship format, we used to operate with frameworks. And the way you approach a framework was kind of, I would say, outdated now, because the actual attainment of any type of grade was decided at the end with your exam that you took at the end. And that kind of allowed the process of teaching, the process of actually learning, it kind of distorted it and didn't make it, I suppose we would start to get to the question that you quite rightly posed at the beginning. When someone finishes a course at the end, are they genuinely prepared for a world of work? Or have they just passed an exam or did the coursework in the last 2 weeks? So I think the surprising thing for me, entering or leaving a world where that was the case, where people did assignments and passed exams, and that was your qualification proved, and you were qualified at that point of view. So at the time that I joined, we'd moved away from that framework approach. And I think the most surprising thing was that we were looking at the qualification and the journey of an apprentice more as a journey rather than that snapshot at the end. What's come out of the apprenticeship at the end. It's more of a holistic view, but more of a 360 view, I like to call it, of an apprentice. And that's kind of where the difference came about, really.
So what you're saying is that when it was a framework model, there was more of a snapshot at the end, but the new version now, in terms of the standards, is more of a holistic approach, which gives you the broader journey of how they get from point A to point B.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people would probably resonate with that model. I know there are certainly some university modules that, you might have not, and this is quite common in colleges and things, where you, not to say you relax through the end, and when it's time for the assignment, you dig your head down and knock out a fantastic assignment, and that's what gets you a good grade. It's more of that holistic view. And I think it's absolutely right. And it helps fix that problem that you posed at the beginning, where you get to the end of an apprenticeship and, are you really prepared for the real world?
Okay. And you believe right now that the way that the standards have been developed, that they are?
I want to wholeheartedly say yes, but I know a part of our conversation today is going to be about AI. And I do think, quite honestly speaking, I do feel with all the advancements we've had with AI, I do feel that our approach to assessment fundamentally needs an overhaul.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, well, let's explore that as we go through. So you find yourself now, you're head of innovation and technology. So you've obviously moved through different roles as you've kind of developed with apprenticeships and developing delivery of apprenticeships through ESO, and then obviously through the broader BPP group. So let's just go to a little bit more now around then. There's a lot of noise in the skills sector right now, policy changes, funding debates, employers complaining about talent gaps, a tale as old as time, if you like, certainly since I've ever been involved. So from where you sit right now, what's the biggest gap between what policymakers think is happening and what is actually happening on the ground?
I would say the biggest gap we really have is in what is actually necessary and required in a workplace, and what the programs we're allowed to deliver actually do deliver, what the actual the churn is, what the outcome is at the end. I would say when it comes to a lot of the things that go on in the apprenticeship world, and I'm sure you'd agree, we're very slow to effect, to actual fruition at the end, because the invent of AI has brought about so many different challenges, so many different things that I feel as an education, as an industry, we're just moving ever so slowly. As you know, with approvals and and things, it does take a long time to make change churn out at the end. So when policies are decided, you ideally want them to stand the test of time, and it's not always the case. And it might be more prevalent in certain subjects than others, but ultimately I feel the space does move very slowly. And I would say one gift I have in my position is I'm able to see these changes and implement them a lot quicker than most other organizations.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. So can you give us, because what I always say to any of the people we speak with is like specific examples so that people can sort of hear what you say, because that's nice that you've said that. So give us an example of what the kind of things you're able to do which allow you to sort of just crack on with things, I suppose.
A gift. I like to use the term gift because, working in this space, first as a teacher to a lecturer, someone who's working with the tech, and I'm in a privileged situation that I'm able to influence massively the user experience that our apprentices actually get to use. So one gift that I have with the systems I'm able to work with, they're very malleable. And when processes change, for example, the requirement of off the job, or a good example would be the need for reviews. Within the apprenticeship standard, the idea is that we have these regular review meetings. Over time, the requirements have kind of changed. For 1 minute, they didn't need to be documented. Next, we were looking for hard, concrete evidence that these reviews have taken place. And then there was another stipulation that we needed to have some type of signature, for example. A signature is not necessary, maybe a tick box is required. With all these changing requirements and how we interpret these rules, it kind of makes things difficult when you're trying to stay compliant. You're trying to make sure everything's auditable. So one of the main gifts I feel I have in my position is the fact that we use tools such as OpenELMS to allow us to mold what we need, our requirements, to the job at hand. And when you work in a heavily compliance driven field like this, the way we work and the requirements we need do change. I'm not sure what kind of organizations you've been a part of, but certainly we devise new processes and adapt to new changes. I'm in a really good position to affect this change in a positive and always seamless process.
Okay, so I think what we're saying there is that certainly for those who aren't familiar with apprenticeships or the compliance around apprenticeships, I suppose that it's because it's so heavily regulated, changes happen seemingly for the people delivering apprenticeships like BPP, SDO, and all the other providers and colleges. They seemingly change almost definitely annually, but certainly within a year, within 12 months, those little rules can change. And the requirements around what you need to capture and how you capture information or evidence around a journey or evidence around what the learner's done or anything like that changes all the time. And so what you're saying is that technology has to be adaptable and flexible enough to deliver in those spaces so that it allows for these changes very quickly. Otherwise, caught off, and if you can't make those changes, then suddenly you're non-compliant. It's imperative, really, right?
It's one of the most important things I would say through several roles I've had and the businesses I've had the pleasure to work with. I would say some of the most successful were companies that actually managed and owned their own processes. What I mean is there's always a situation that I find common in most organizations, to be honest, which is, we do it that way because we've always done it that way. But what good software allows you to do, when I mean by good software that you in fact own, what that allows you to do really is to mold your processes exactly how you need them. So you're not doing things because that's the way it works in Excel or that's the way it works in, one software or another. Actually, it fits what you need to get your job done. And that's one of the powerful things I feel with the OpenELM system, because it doesn't come out the box looking exactly one particular way. We're able to affect the journey the user goes on. We're able to affect this in exactly the way that we want our learners to experience it, because there's so many customizations and ability to twist and mold in our direction. So it's a really important point. I think a lot of businesses do miss that to own your process is a massive improvement. And I think the use of AI only helps that.
Before we continue, a quick thank you from our sponsor, OpenELMS Learning Generator. With just a text prompt or document, AI instantly builds a full professional course, complete with video presenters, quizzes, animations, and voiceovers in any language. You can edit everything online and export it as e-learning, a PowerPoint or video. And you can even export it as a podcast or video game experience. The best part? You can try it free for 14 days and see how you can use this special agentic AI system to transform your training at openelms.ai. Back to the show.
I mean, I'm going to agree with that, obviously, but I think some organizations out there would argue that they would prefer sometimes an out-of-the-box solution that's kind of like, that's how we do it, because they can then get their staff all pulling in that direction on just the out-of-the-box solution, because there's no way to be flexible around it. It's like, this is how we do it to get the result here. So there's an argument for some to say, well, actually, we prefer it that way, which I totally understand. For those other organizations that require their own way of doing things, their own vision of how they want to implement things, and so the different systems can offer different plus points, if you like.
Absolutely.
So what you're saying in this case is just, even though we're talking about our system, but either way, the flexible options there give you the opportunity.
Yeah, and the very nature of apprenticeships is exactly that. And I think that's where your question was leading towards, or certainly involved, where in a world of so much compliance, we need the flexibility to implement change in a seamless way.
Yes.
So it doesn't affect the user experience or in a detrimental way.
You're not subject to a company saying that we'll deliver that in the next X amount of months or weeks. You have the capacity to do it yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you're not just implementing technology, you're leading innovation to a certain extent, or helping to lead innovation, part of what BPP Education Group is trying to achieve. So what does that actually mean in practice? How do you think about technology's role in transforming apprenticeship delivery? What are you seeing in the space, and how are you planning around your role and how it works at BPP?
So when it comes to implementation of technology, we as an organization are quite unique, as in we have 100% delivery of our courses and our materials. The platforms we use, the technology we use is really important. And the fact that we're able to move with the times is also quite important to our business model. As a lover of all things tech myself, I have my feet firmly inside of all the arenas that are exploring these new technologies for learning, new approaches. But just because it exists doesn't mean we have to do it. And doesn't mean it fits or it would be suited for the way we do our delivery. One of the things that I'm really excited that we've got on board with is we've teamed up with a company called Scalable, and we now offer virtualized labs. These virtual labs allow our learners to really get in touch with the technology and practice using real computers and real software to mimic the real world scenarios that they might face in the workplace. This is a really powerful addition.
So what does that mean? Obviously, I mean, I understand that because I've been inside that space. But for those who, when you say virtual labs and how it mirrors the workplace, like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So to really understand what I mean is, if, for example, you were a network administrator and that was your apprenticeship, you were doing a network administrator apprenticeship and you were doing some administration. Well, in order for you to learn that, you would need to have a scenario where you have users, you have the software you will use, and you know how to administer and configure these devices. Now, to get a computer with all of the things that you need to learn, to break it perhaps, to learn from what's been going on inside of the configuration of the system, in order to do that is very, very hard. And what the technology allows us to do is to virtualize that environment, and we can package that experience, if you like, into something called a lab. So when I say like a lab environment or virtualized environment, that's what I mean. We were able to take a snapshot of a system given a certain scenario and package that up with some tasks, with some activities to do inside of that virtualized environment. And we're able to package it up and we can call that a lab. And that lab
Okay.
can be used to teach and deliver real life skills in a real life environment.
And then obviously it can be used to then evidence
absolutely learning.
the journey the learner's going on in terms of learning
Absolutely.
through the processes that they're going through.
Absolutely. So gone are the days where a multiple choice test will show the competency of someone. Gone are those days where multiple choice or writing assignment will show that a learner understands something. Now, with these tools, we're able to actually see and test the output from a learner in a real life scenario. So it gives us a lot more flexibility and power to get our assessment exactly where it needs to be, which is one of the things I think AI is causing a problem with.
Okay, well, look, dive right into there now. It's a nice segue. So, everyone's been talking about and continues to talk about not just
Absolutely.
AI in society generally, but we're talking about AI specifically in education and skills. So you'll have come across a number of solutions around AI, and perhaps you're using some of them at scale with apprenticeships. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're using them with some employers, not all. I don't know for you to answer. But have you seen anything with genuine value? Have you seen anything that you think is genuinely solving problems? And are you seeing anything that is just hype?
With AI specifically, if I'm being absolutely honest, and I know this is one of the questions that are being bandied around this space, and it's the question of return on investment. So in the educational space, by way of AI, there's just been very little movement. If I'm being honest, there are some companies who think out the box and innovate. I know yourselves, your software, your platform enables people to do AI assessment. And that's really powerful when it comes to the generation of content and the curation of materials, really, really powerful. But when we translate that into what companies like us are using currently, it's very, very little in the grand context of things. As I mentioned before, I feel the space moves very slow. But one powerful implementation, and I think that's where AI gets really powerful, it's enhancing the tools rather than creating a new tool all by itself. So one of the examples is in the lab development that we do. What we're able to assess a screenshot. So what the AI will allow us to do is to say, once a administrator has configured a Active Directory correctly, this is what the screenshot should look like. And the AI is able to articulate and make some assumptions based off the screenshot it sees. That's something that would be very difficult for us to implement without AI, because it would mean some form of submission, a human go through that assessment and then take it back. But it really changes what we're able to do.
What stops a learner from doing that and then posting the results?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, your task was to build a MySQL database. Yeah. The reality is we need to see a database with the correct structure, with the correct constraints, with a couple of records in. Now, in order to do that inside of that lab environment, there's no real other way to use AI to help you at that point in time, because this lab environment is built for you to do the particular task. And if you do everything correctly, what the AI is able to do is to visually see the output. And it might be different to the example, but it will have a fault tolerance of things that you're able to allow. So let's say, for example, they misspelled a name, or they added more records or fewer records than the example. The AI is able to see that screenshot and make a judgment on what is acceptable given the acceptance criteria. And when you're in a lab environment without the trainer, we're able to actually assess the learner and give them a score based on actual outcome. It makes that assessment process a lot quicker and a lot more evidence based. So what that allows us to do is, instead of submitting a screenshot or one question to a trainer, the AI will actively assess that as part of the process. And that's a really powerful thing for us as teachers.
So the marking of that particular element is done by the AI component. right?
Yeah.
So people who are worried about AI and its impact on not just, again, we're talking about AI in education, but AI in society, but in this case, again, AI in education. How can we hear something like that and not be worried about people's jobs, their roles, and their futures?
Yeah, and this is another common debate that's flying around, and it's not that I want to settle everyone, because I don't think that's entirely true, but I don't feel people should be worried, especially when it comes to this particular education piece. I don't necessarily think people should be worried. It's an augmentation of what we do rather than a replacement. So given that scenario, the idea is it's meant as a supplement, not as a replacement. And that's where I think people need to remember what's at the heart of education. Yeah, what's at the heart of the learning process. The teaching and learning process should definitely include a human, someone who can see your needs and cater to your needs as required, rather than an AI who will make an attempt. And I'm sure there's the argument to say it will only get better, but the AI is there to try and make an assessment, but it should be a supplement, not a replacement.
Yeah, I agree. And I think plenty would agree with that. So let's look at that then in terms of how that works in practical sense, like scale versus personalization, right?
Interesting.
Because any business, including those in the education sector, has always had to fight the balance between quality and quantity, right? And if AI can take some heavy lifting, you'll be sure the bean counters are going to try and implement ways to do that, so that more learners can come on board with less
Friction.
outputs.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Well, it's just the way it is. Because there's quality quantity, it will always happen. Now, some providers will be like, no, we need the humans, or we'll keep them, and there's going to be some that like, no, we'll find a balance. There'll be some who'll go, and we'll have everything in between. That's just the way it's going to be. So, you work at the moment with thousands of apprentices across the UK. So how do you balance the need for standardization, quality, compliance, right, with the reality that, let's say, someone on a level 3 in Manchester needs something different from a level 5 in London?
Well, I hope the answer doesn't shock you, because
Depends on what the answer is, Idris.
yeah, well, I hope the answer doesn't shock you, because I think in order to have that balance, it's not the technology. It's not the technology that will offer.
Yeah.
It's the idea that every learner is differentiated for, and we will hit the sweet spot, or we aim to hit the sweet spot for each individual learner. And that's where the technology should help, because if we have meaningful and purposeful assessment, and it's not just about assessment, when I think back to the point I said earlier about the frameworks, if we have meaningful tracking, and I like to use the phrase, the 360 view, if you have meaningful tracking, then you can really differentiate for your learner, and as granular as you can get will help when it comes to that fitting exactly what the learner needs, not necessarily what the tech has done. And so, yeah, I hope the answer doesn't surprise you, because I think people...
Well, no, that shouldn't surprise anybody. I mean, ultimately what you're saying is that working towards a learner first philosophy, then the individual learner comes first and you work your way back from there. That shouldn't shock anybody. Really, yeah, I'd say any deliverer of education worth their salt should be thinking along those lines. However, in practicality, it's very difficult to do that, because dealing with every single person when you're dealing with thousands of learners, or even hundreds of learners for the smaller providers, is very, very time resource heavy.
Absolutely.
So does the model work? Yes or no? I don't know. I mean, that's, we'll get
I
some
would
more
say
things. So go for it, yeah.
The model absolutely, our model works. Obviously, we go through inspections and such, as well as our internal quality processes. The model absolutely works. But going back to what I said, once the systems allow you to collect meaningful and purposeful metrics, then it makes that process a lot more seamless. There's less friction in the way, because
So
exactly...
Give us some examples of really meaningful metrics that genuinely showcase
So,
something for you that was like, this is a
absolutely.
good thing?
Absolutely. So if we were to contrast a previous system we used to use, that would basically tell you at the end, this is what the learner has achieved. They've met this criteria, that criteria, great. But it's not really enough to get that 360 view that I speak about all the time. So an example of what I'm talking about is the ability to see how much the learner has done in contribution to their overall off the job requirement. And for those who are not familiar with apprenticeships, I assume everyone is sometimes, but those who aren't familiar with the apprenticeship system, the idea is you're meant to use 20% of your working time towards your apprenticeship, to building your apprenticeship and working on your apprenticeship. So that could be, for example, 1 day out of the 5-day week would be dedicated to working on your apprenticeship. And so that requirement needs you to carefully audit every single minute you spend towards your off the job time. Now, without a good enough system for doing so, a system that was seamless and worked with us rather than something we had to work to get the outcome, without that, it just makes that process a lot harder even. So when it comes to auditing, you need a system that can effortlessly tell you the contribution a learner has done, right down to the minute. These are kind of really important things. And to answer your question, you need to know several metrics, not just the fact your learner has come to the sessions. Just because they've attended every session doesn't mean when it comes to their endpoint assessment, they're going to fly through it because they've attended every session. Doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Just because they've completed all their coursework doesn't mean that when they get to that endpoint assessment, they're going to do really well. Or when they finish their apprenticeship, that they're job ready. So these metrics altogether help us build a picture that is unique for the learner.
It's a collation of evidence that creates a picture, that promotes a positive outcome.
Yeah, it's not just the outcome. To answer your question, it's about tailoring it to the learner. Yeah, that journey for the learner. And that's where the technology comes in. It's people that will do the actual implementation, but once your data is in order and you're able to build that digital image of how your learner has got from the start to the end of their journey, and you can evidence everything very well audited, that's where me as a trainer or a coach can work and see, this is exactly what you've got. This is what you're missing. And I can see you're lacking in this area. So with these metrics, you can make that review process a lot more seamless. And that's where the technology gets really powerful with it.
I get it. I think this is why it's key that organizations are responsible for their own vision, their own values, their own metrics. They then from there look for systems that will enable them to work around those, the vision and values.
Absolutely.
That will then allow, for in this case, if you're looking at individuals as the centerpiece and how you personalize it, the scale comes from understanding how to differentiate between individuals and then how you can seamlessly use technology to replicate that model across thousands of people, each time giving them something slightly different depending on their needs.
Absolutely.
So it's using, I suppose, AI and technology to enhance, but not to replace, I think is what we're saying. Okay, so I'll move on then quickly to the employer partnership puzzle. So apprenticeships only really work when employers are genuinely engaged and not just ticking a box.
Absolutely.
What's the difference between employers who treat apprenticeships as strategic capability building versus those who see it as subsidized recruitment? How do you move them from one to the other?
I would say the ambition that the employer has. If, for example, you as an employer has a ambition of achieving a certain level or a certain type of output or a particular goal, then you can strategically work with a provider like ours to make sure you're able to achieve said vision, your aspiration. But if you're just I suppose we do it that way, so we've always done it that way, and we'll always continue to do it that way, then you would be the latter. So it's about the employers who have that vision, who know what it will entail to stay current in their industries, to stay current and bringing in new talent, new skills that are forward facing. not necessarily just carrying on with, as you say, more subsidized recruitment. It should be more purposeful with the aim of improvement, elevation. And we see examples of that all the time, where learners are able to learn something within the training and then implement it as a project perhaps, or implement it as part of the processes that take place in the workplace. It's a really powerful dynamic.
Do you think the conflict between what an apprenticeship is, the reason why I'm going to cover this is because I think it's still something that confuses the wider society. There's certainly some people I've spoken to, not just here, but actually the global people we speak to. There's a kind of a misunderstanding of what apprenticeships are to a certain extent in the UK, because obviously there was the kind of traditional model was always like taking a young person who potentially had just left school and putting them into a master apprentice environment where they learn from somebody who is a master of their particular trade. They then go through that journey of learning through this person and with them as they do a variety of different things, and they then attain mastery over a period of time. That's obviously been morphed in, over the last 30, 40 years into more of a kind of like, how do you do that? Taking someone from school and putting them into a workplace environment at a very, very junior level, and they work their way up, and apprenticeships can be part of that route way, to then being kind of transformed into also a kind of HR program addition, where you can actually take anybody from across the organization or anybody and actually go, do you want to do an apprenticeship? Well, there are these programs which are kind of, development programs, not traditional apprenticeships, if you like, but development programs that you can now go on and train existing staff. So what is it, and what models are used by you guys in terms of how employers address? Is it a skills gap thing now where anybody in an organization can be using an apprenticeship to address a skills gap, or is it a young person's transition from...
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Andy, because it's something that we just don't do. It's something quite deliberate and purposeful, the way we cater and produce our curriculums. We actually have staff members and teams dedicated to making sure that what the industry needs, exactly what we're able to deliver, what we're actually able to impart. And to lead on from your question that you were saying there, yes, you're right. Apprenticeships traditionally have been, oh, you're a school or you finished your A-level, so you're going to do an apprenticeship. But absolutely not. I would put it to you that a large majority of our learners are actually experienced members of staff who are looking for how to take their careers to the next level or to implement new technologies inside of the workplace. And it's really that synergy that makes it vital that what we are producing, the curriculum we're trying to offer, marry and match up to what they are needing in the workplace. Given all the challenges that come in, it is a bit of a delicate dance, but it's something that we're absolutely proud of. It's quite deliberate that our curriculums have to be more deliberate. Going back to what I said very early on, I feel the education space moves quite slow, and it's just through how many processes there are that makes things move very, very slowly. When the compliance changes very quickly and your systems and processes are slow to change, it's getting it right, making things that are actually scalable, as you mentioned, making things that are scalable and a lot more frictionless inside the processes and implementation.
So are we saying that when I asked the question originally, are you basically just saying yes? Because what you're basically saying is that apprenticeships can be used as a tool to develop a young person who's left school, and that you'll take people who fit that brief.
Yeah,
But you also use it as a way to cover skills gaps with an organization. It doesn't matter what age they are, what experience they come with. If they're going to use it in the right way and use that program in the right way to further themselves and further their knowledge
absolutely.
and skills, it's used in that way as well. And there's nothing wrong with that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. There's not one approach or one reason for having an apprenticeship or taking part of an apprenticeship. It could be a personal journey. As we mentioned, it could be a strategic decision by an employer. There's varying levels. We do take school leavers at level 3 right up to level 7. We're able to offer apprenticeships. So there's definitely something in it for everyone at every level, at every stage. So it shouldn't be that old adage that, oh yeah, I've just left university.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, there definitely does seem to be a shift. I mean, the framework model that you touched on at the very beginning was primarily used as a young, not always, there was certainly still sort of 25 plus age group used this framework model as well. It's like a work-based learning exercise and people could pay for them. So there was, but it just wasn't anywhere near as popular as some of the standards have been in terms of development of workforces across the UK using the levy to forward and to develop their existing skills workforce. So 5 years from now, what does apprenticeship delivery look like? What does excellent apprenticeship delivery look like?
Love that question, because it is something that I think about often, not phrased in that way of 5 years in the future, maybe a couple of years in the future or in a year or two, because technology moves so much and our requirement for technology is also going to move. And something I said earlier on as well is the way we fundamentally assess things has got to move more to the approach I was mentioning with AI. These things in let's say 5 years time, there'll be less focus on the system and more focus on the output. Almost to the point where your platform and your workplace environment are kind of seamless. Yeah. So imagine currently our learners use your platform as a hub to go to evidence their work, to access their schedule, to change learner details, to do all sorts, to do their reviews. They can do it all in your system today. I think in 5 years' time, your system is not necessarily that hub you go to. It would be evident inside of the systems that the learners would be working with. So there's less middle ground for us doing the evidence building, doing the reflect. It'd be inside of different environments. And so it's a bit of a radical idea, but it's the idea that there's less moving parts and the requirement is actually able to be achieved in the workplace a lot more seamlessly. That's what I think is in the future, where assessment is taking place more in situ rather than extracted from the source and evidence somewhere else. I feel it would be less of that gap and it'd be more in situ.
2 more questions. What's the one thing that the apprenticeship sector needs to stop doing and the one thing that it needs to start doing?
It's a very deep question. Very deep question. Because one would argue that if it needed to stop doing something, one would argue that naturally it would have evolved to not need that one particular thing. So back to the example of frameworks, the way you achieve is you complete all the criteria and then it's done. So away from that type of approach, the system with the employer-led groups, the system or the processes we used evolved over time and got opinions from the employers, from the learners, from the providers. And we arrived at this point where we believe that the standards are the way forward. And all that needs to happen now is that the criteria over time might change, from one version to the next. So, what apprenticeships need to stop, I would imagine there shouldn't be a great deal that needs to stop. But I would say the approach we have now does meet it a lot better because it's not just a simple case of metrics. It's that holistic view, and so the fact that that's included inside of the assessment or inside of the process, I think that's definitely a winner. But to say something that we need to stop, to give you an answer would probably be the weight the compliance plays, just because not everyone's journey is exactly the same. But obviously we have to kind of make a general assumption. And when you dictate that certain things need to be done, for example, one of the rules inside of the apprenticeship standard is that any work the learner does, that 20% that I was talking about, one of the rules is that work needs to be done within work time, within the hours of 9 to 5 or 10 to 6, wherever your work pattern is. Now, that doesn't always work for everyone that they are able to do those tasks at those times. For example, I might work a little over the time I finish work, or I might start early. And just because I've done some work outside of those times, but the rules are the rules, so to give you an answer, I feel sometimes the rules do hinder and life doesn't work in a box. I know we
Sure.
need to make the generalization, but
Sure.
that's one thing that apprenticeships could do better.
Okay.
Be a bit more malleable to every scenario and treat every scenario a little bit different depending on perhaps the sector, the type of role. But for now, this is the rules and everyone does it. That's just difficult. Don't have to answer your
Okay,
question.
very good. Okay, last question. There's one thing, ask this to everybody. If there's one thing that you want anybody to remember from the conversation today, what would it be?
That AI is not a replacement for hard work. Yeah. AI shouldn't be a replacement, and I don't feel it will eventually be a replacement for hard work. AI is there to bolster what we do, to supplement what we do, whether you're in the teaching side or the learning side, the tech is there to bolster what we do, to take it further, to make it more seamless. So we shouldn't be afraid of the tech. We shouldn't be fearful of it. We should see how we can work with it to arrive at what will be perfect harmony.
Well, we can but dream.
That's an optimistic laugh there.
I mean, no, thank you. I mean, I think, yes, the thing is with the topics we've touched on today, I think there's an argument that you could legitimately go on for hours on any particular area to a certain extent. And it's quite hard. So some people might listen to this who are experts in apprenticeships or experts in work-based learning or the UK skills sector and be like, oh, but they didn't cover this. And oh my goodness, they didn't go into that. And oh, how could they not have spoken about this? And I get it. I mean, I really do. Like, it's really hard to cover so many different things off. And hopefully, some of these questions will be asked again in other conversations.
Absolutely.
We'll
Absolutely.
cover them off in different ways. But it's been really enlightening and very helpful to hear about the things that you're doing and the way that you're trying to make it work, BPP, and it's not easy. It's not an easy time, but it's good to see that there are organisations that are constantly thinking, constantly trying to evolve with the advancements of what's happening in the times that we live in. So, thanks for your time, your input, your insights. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we go?
No, really enjoyed our conversation. And thank you very much for having me.
All right, a pleasure. Awesome. Thank you.
Take care.